No matter what hour your clock strikes here, it's always Halloween. Hello, welcome. I am your host, Lucé Tomlin-Brenner. Welcome to my pod closet. I've got my beautiful Halloween background here, and let's not forget my collection of belts. Yes, these are very important professional sound absorbing belts. So they must be along the walls, and they're along the walls in every professional podcast studio. You just don't see them, but me here. I care about taking you behind the scenes and being honest about what a podcast recording studio really looks like. So we've got the pod belts, we've got the very important background, and today I'm reading the introduction to Calling the Spirits, A History of Seances. This is Lisa Morton's new book. If you don't know Lisa Morton, I have used her research on our podcast before. She is the pinnacle of Halloween research and Halloween history writing. So we love Lisa Morton. I got to meet her at the most recent Midsummer Scream event, Awaken the Spirits, when a bunch of lanterns got together here in Southern California, and we all got to meet and talk, and then we went to a panel on horror writing and how that's affected by the pandemic, and how are people inspired by it, are they crushed by it, this, that, and every emotion in between. But it was moderated by Lisa Morton, and then afterwards she signed books, which was really a very special experience because I got to sort of be very intense with her and be like, I love Halloween, I have a Halloween podcast, which, you know, I'm happy that I said that, but then I almost immediately felt like, oh God, don't listen, you're much smarter than me, which is, you know, not me trying to come down on myself, just me being an enthusiast, but not a historic academic. And then immediately felt just a little self-conscious that maybe she would listen and be like, oh my God, you didn't get this right, or you could have said this better, or actually, and then, you know, your mind, it does things. I am trying to let those feelings go, but I'm just being honest with you. We all get those feelings, and it's good to regulate them and not run away with them. Hopefully she's too busy and too focused on her own things to pay that much attention to me, or maybe she'll listen and she'll love it. Hey, good things are possible too, not just anxious thoughts. The good thoughts are also things that could happen. So with that in mind, I'll be reading a little selection of this to you today. I am doing this in lieu of a Small Frights episode. Usually on Fridays, we have our Small Frights community-driven episodes. After Midsummer Scream, which was this past weekend, I completely lost my voice from, screaming the entire time. And the time in which the window I have to record the podcast and get it to Pete for editing and sound passed. So now my voice is sounding better. It's too late for me to put together this week's Small Frights, but I will be working on next week's. And also I wanted to give you a little sneak peek of this book because it just came out and it's really fun and I think you're going to like it a lot. This isn't paid. This isn't an advertisement. This is really just my passion that I'm sharing with you. But Lisa Morton, if you want to give me some money, I'll take it. So I don't think she's rich. I think she's just getting by like all artists are. Let me give you the little inside the cover reading here. Calling the Spirits investigates the eerie history of our conversations with the dead. From necromancy in Homer's Odyssey to the emergence of spiritualism, when Victorians were entranced by mediums and the seance was born. Among our cast are the Fox sisters, teenagers surrounded by spirit trappings who later confessed to fraud. Daniel Douglas's home, often called the greatest medium of all time, who was seen to levitate during sittings. William Crookes, the renowned scientist who risked his reputation to affirm the psychic powers of a young Florence Cook. Houdini and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, whose unlikely friendship was forged. I didn't know that happened. And Riven by the Afterlife, and Helen Duncan, the medium whose 1944 trial for witchcraft proved more popular than war news. The book also considers Ouija boards, modern psychics, and paranormal investigations, and is illustrated with engravings, fine art, channeled from beyond, and photographs. Hugely entertaining, this book begs the question, is anybody there? So, that's what this book is about, with a little bit of input from me in that moment, not in general. I don't know Lisa Morton. I just talked to her at an event. But she did do this really sweet, she signed it and did a really sweet tribute, which made me feel special and happy. So let's get into the introduction. There are 8 chapters here. I mean, this is a thick book. I don't do book presentations. I'm not a YouTuber. This is just me being myself the way I would be on the podcast, but it's over 300 pages, so that's tight. Lots to read. Okay, so the introduction has a picture of a seance in 1910. Absolutely so, like, I can feel this photo, like the chill in it, how tight their corsets were. This just reminds me so much of The Others, starring Nicole Kidman, one of my all-time favorite movies that I watch multiple times a year once it's the Halloween season, because it is so atmospheric to me. The chill, the fog, the candelabras, that's like exactly the spooky feeling that I like to have during the calendar Halloween season. Let's not forget, it's always Halloween. How many times will she say that today? My God. All right. Here we go. A group of London's 19th century elite gather in an ornate drawing room to participate in a seance. The medium, Madame Calais, directs the guests to be seated around a large glass-topped table and to place their hands, all touching, on the tabletop. The gas in the room is turned down. See, I told you it was chilly. The gas in the room is turned down as the medium asks them to join her in suspending disbelief and to, quote, imagine your minds floating in the darkness of time. I love that. She summons the dead and abruptly convulses. When she speaks again, her voice is altered, deeper and heavily accented. What's more upsetting than a heavily accented voice? The 1900s in America, man. Rough. Soon, mayhem erupts as spirits possess a woman in the circle who reenacts the excruciating death of another sitter's daughter. Ugh. Gusts of wind blow out the remaining candles. Doors slam. The glass tabletop shatters, and the possessed woman is wrenched into impossible positions as the other guests scream in horror. This scene from the second episode of the television series Penny Dreadful, she got us there, epitomizes what many of us think of when we're asked to imagine a seance. Or we might perhaps imagine a moment at a Halloween party when someone pulls out a Ouija board, place the planchette on the lettered surface, and watched it glide beneath the fingers positioned on top of it. This common perception of a seance has been indelibly shaped by decades of popular culture. Horror novels and movies have imprinted the seance with images of terror, while the Ouija board has moved from an innocent game to a piece of occult equipment. The Ouija board, condemned by believers in a variety of religions, has... Guess what? I turned the page, completely forgot what I was saying. Let's go back, shall we? This is not an edited video. Horror novels and movies have imprinted the seance with images of terror, while the Ouija board has moved from an innocent game to a piece of occult equipment, condemned by believers in a variety of religions, apparently because of its effectiveness in producing spirits. The original form of the seance, however, before it was haunted by the specter of mass entertainment and consumerism, love that, was a very different creature. Consider this description from an 1873 edition of a spiritualist's newspaper. Here's the picture from Penny Dreadful, starring Eva Green and Reeve Carney. The episode's called Seance. All right, here's the excerpt from the newspaper. Mrs. Everett and Reverend F. Monick, both of them good mediums, offered to give us a sitting, so we commenced in the usual way with singing and prayer. after which the spirits chose some appropriate portions of scripture to be read. Listen, I gotta say, I would be bummed if I was like, let's conjure the spirits, and then they were like, here's the Bible, let's read it together. Not, spirits aren't necessarily like gonna be your buds. You might not have things in common. Keep that in mind. Our invisible friends then commenced giving us a series of raps in all parts of the room. Rapping on the door, not hip-hop spitting beats. Just for everybody who can't read the word here, doesn't know, wants the context. I'm here for context. Our invisible friends then commenced giving us a series of raps in all parts of the room. Our party numbered 15, all intimate friends. At the beginning of the seance, Nippy, one of Mrs. Everett's spirit friends, raised up the tablecloth from beneath with his materialized hand, and each person present felt his fingers distinctly through the cloth in the light. We then lowered the gas and sang again, when we had quite a shower of lights varying in size. We carried on a conversation with the lights, which signaled answers in the usual way, each spirit claiming some friend by the light passing towards him. 3 flashes were given quickly for yes, and 1 for no. We had cool breezes laden with perfumes. We commenced singing again, and Mr. Monk was lifted, chair and all, into the air, after which his boots were pulled off and thrown to the other end of the room. He then was entranced by the spirit Sam, trick-or-treat fans, who asked that an accordion which Dr. Hitchum had bought should be tied tightly with string so that it could not be pulled open. It was the accordion was accordingly tied with strong twine passed about 8 times round. The spirit then played it quite melodiously on each of our shoulders, the string remaining firmly bound on it the entire time. Sam next asked for his medium to be bound to a chair. 3 of our circle bound him tightly and securely, all of us examining the tying. We began to sing, and in 4 seconds the medium was released, and among us. The rope was found under the sofa, tied and knotted in such an intricate way that it would take 20 minutes for an ordinary mortal to undo it. Thus ended one of the most convincing seances I have ever witnessed. Yeah, we don't see a lot of knot tying in seance movies. Very few Boy Scout ghosts. Interesting, something for creatives to think about. The original form of the seance was created by the Fox sisters, 2 teenage American girls who, in 1848, discovered that they could entertain groups of curiosity seekers by seating them around a table and producing rapping sounds that they claimed came from the spirits, but it took the spiritualists on both sides of the Atlantic to refine it. As evidenced from the description above, it was initially 1 part joyful church meeting, or a revival show, 1 part social gathering, and 1 part thrilling display of what participants fully believed was proof of life after death. Spiritualism, a movement born as a counter to the rapid progressions in science, industry, and urbanization in the 19th century, presented itself as the first religion that allowed its followers to routinely witness proof of their belief in survival after death. That is extraordinarily fascinating to me because I would say that a lot of people interested in like the occult now, who I'm currently wearing gravestone earrings, people who, like Ouija boards and even wear like Ouija board type art. Those are not people that, I don't know everybody, and this is a very broad statement. But I would say like the general goth Halloweeny community are not also super religious, super Christian in that they connect the two. Perhaps they are, but I don't see people's interest in the occult very often going hand in hand with their interest in like Christianity and how proving life after death is connected to Christianity or belief in God. Again, I'm speaking very broadly from a personal experience, and anecdotes are not science or really proof of anything, but I am curious about what your thoughts are in relation to that, because putting it in the context of like a church group is just something that I wasn't familiar with. And Lisa is right. That's not the type of visions and visuals that we see in our popular culture or mass media. So I think it's real interesting to think of spiritualism as a religion or a religious movement. Perhaps you have thought of that already, and good for you. I just had not. However, the seance also presents as one of the, However, the seance also presents as one of that century's great frauds, forcing spiritualists to become adept at defending themselves against debunkers. Take, for instance, the medium who led the enthusiastic Liverpool gathering noted above, Francis W. Monk, a former Baptist minister turned spiritualist medium who, 4 years after that seance, becomes one of the first mediums to be convicted under UK's Vagrancy Act, which covers every person pretending or professing to tell fortunes or using any subtle craft, means, or device by palmistry or otherwise to deceive and impose on His Majesty's subjects. My goodness, the Vagrancy Act really covers a lot. So Francis W. Monk was convicted under the UK's Vagrancy Act and sentenced to serve 3 months. Damn, that is a waste of taxpayer money. Monk's practices would come under the legal spotlight again 30 years later when one of his most ardent supporters, the Anglican Reverend Thomas Coley, battled the magician and skeptic John Neville Maskelyne. Perhaps that's not the correct pronunciation, but that's what came to me first. He battled the skeptic John Neville Maskelyne in court after Maskelyne reproduced Monk's spiritual materialization effort. Nope. My goodness. The alarms, the sirens outside threw me off. Let's try this one more time. Okay. The Anglican Reverend Thomas Coley battled the magician and skeptic John Neville Maskelyne in court after Maskelyne reproduced Monk's spirit materialization effect. Maskelyne lost the case after he failed to pull the manifestation back into his body at the conclusion of the act, which Monk had purposely done. Spiritualism, in fact, began with imposture, the preferred word at the time for fraud. Spiritualism had in fact begun with imposture when the Fox sisters began to communicate with spirits in 1848. The Foxes were a middle-class family living in a small house in upstate New York when strange phenomenon began to occur. Sounds were heard throughout the house, and two of the girls, Katie and Maggie, soon claimed to be in communication with spirits. When the girls called on their otherworldly contacts, loud rappings could be heard all around them. They soon took their act on the road, their performances referred to as table rappings or table sittings. When the first British spiritualist newspaper, the Yorkshire Spiritual Telegraph, began publication in 1855, the word séance wasn't present, and gatherings were referred to as either spirit rappings or table movings. Séance would appear in issues from 1856, however. Although the word séance wouldn't come into popular use for gatherings of those hopeful of contacting the spirits until the late 1850s, the word had already acquired an interesting history. Originally, a French word, the root means to sit, that referred to any large gathering, especially those of a political nature. Séance first took on a more unusual meaning in the 1930s when it was used to describe gatherings of those practicing animal magnetism or mesmerism, a popular belief at the time that was the immediate precursor to spiritualism. Interesting. And real quick, before we get on the next page, I want to show you this picture of the Fox sisters, Maggie, Katie, and the older sister, Leah. This was taken in 1852. They look bummed, huh? This is them being like, oh, we are so haunted. Ghosts are coming for us. Nobody smiled in the 1800s. It wasn't just them. Everybody looked creepy in those pictures. All right, next page. Animal magnetism, a phrase I absolutely adore, postulated that all living fauna possess an energy that can be directed by skilled practitioners to heal illness. Although it was eventually extended to also encompass telepathy and communication with the dead. It was immensely popular in England and Europe in the 1840s. Note a brief newspaper article entitled Society in Paris, Somnambulism, from 1843. Animal magnetism has become the rage in professional somnambules. That's a very hard word to say. I've never heard it spoken out loud before. Animal magnetism has become the rage, and professional somnambules are invited to give a seance for the entertainment of a select circle. This is one of the earliest examples of seance used in the context of group seeking and esoteric entertainment in the form of a circle. Here is a sheet of music from 1853 that's a testament to the popularity of spirit rappings. So I'm going to show you the illustration, and then also please note the mammy figure in the background, who possibly also has a child or another, I'm thinking, let's see, 1853, could be slaves. Interesting. Important piece of history from many perspectives. All right. Meanwhile, even this nascent view of the word drew skeptics, as in an 1853 article on a demonstration of animal magnetism by one Mr. Robinson. Will antics be cut any longer in small towns where gulls will be clawed at the rate of 2 shillings per seance, and the completest delusion that the human mind ever entertained be preserved in any longer? We certainly hope not. We certainly hope not. People are so worked up. That same year saw what was likely the first use of seance to describe a gathering specifically dedicated to contacting spirits of the dead. Eliot Warburton's Episodes of Eastern Travel, originally serialized in the Dublin University magazine and then gathered together for publication in a single volume, describes an evening Warburton has in Cairo. Cairo is how they pronounce it in the state of Illinois. If it's in Egypt, it's pronounced Cairo. Cairo, very interesting abandoned town in southern Illinois that, unlike the one that has the fire underneath it in Pennsylvania, very similar looking, stuff totally abandoned, everything like dolls and books and things, like it looks like somebody had just lived there like 20 years ago and then just like disappeared. It's very similar vibe, but there is no fire underneath. It actually was more interesting. Well, not more interesting. Having a fire burn under your town is like the height of interest. But fascinating to me is that this town had like this really like racist history where it was like mostly a black town, but then white people, or it was mostly a white town and then black people moved in and then all the white people left, and much more complicated than what I'm saying now in an aside, but an abandoned town basically due to racism and really intense racial violence from decades and decades ago, not recent. Look it up, spelled Cairo, Illinois. That's my aside and why I mispronounced that. Okay, describes an evening Warburton has in Cairo, in which an Egyptian magician summons the dead by casting spells on a young boy, who then gazes into ink poured into his hands and can see the spirits within. Oh my God, scary. Warburton, whose travelogues were beloved throughout Britain, noted that the seance broke up late in the evening. Outlining the etymology of seance is one thing, but defining its form is just as important. There are festivals all over the world, such as Dia de los Muertos in Mexico, which we have talked about on the podcast early on. There's an episode from last November about it if you want to check it out. Or the Hungry Ghost Festival in China, also talked about that early on, and I think that was in the episode that was like International Festivals of the Dead. That allow for interaction between the living and the dead, but these celebrations are almost diametrically opposed to the seance. In these festivals, participants accept that the dead will return of their own volition and choose to honor them with their favorite foods and other mortal enjoyments. However, in a seance, these spirits return at the will of the medium and are used then for their knowledge rather than feted. A seance is also not, strictly speaking, necromancy. Erica with the last name. Erica Bourguignon. Let's go with Bourguignon. I'm sorry, Erica. I've never seen this last name before. Erica Bourguignon, who prepared the entry on necromancy in the Encyclopedia of Religion, says that necromancy is the art or practice of magically conjuring up the souls of the dead and is primarily a form of divination. The principal purpose of seeking such communication with the dead is to obtain information from them, generally regarding the revelation of unknown causes or the future course of events. Bourguignon also notes that because necromancy involves magical conjuration, it does not include communication employing mediums. The Catholic Encyclopedia challenges this latter notion. In recent times, necromancy as a distinct belief and practice reappears under the name of spiritualism. However, the seance can be traced as a direct descendant of the earliest forms of necromancy, dating back to Egyptian, Babylonian, Greek, and Roman accounts. Isn't that so interesting? So we have been talking on the podcast for the last year almost about how Halloween goes all the way back to the Romans and the Celts before then, and it really feels like we also, on our chapter on skeletons, also studied how it was connected originally to Celts and Romans, and in my research on witches, it goes back to them too. So, like, of course, everything can be traced. I mean, I want to say of course, because I find this really interesting, that everything can be traced back to antiquity. What I find interesting about it is we tend to, we live in the modern world, we only get a few decades under our belt. So a lot of things feel like new and modern and fresh, and in some ways they are, but for the most part, a lot of the things we like connected to Halloween, the root of them is in antiquity, and it has taken other forms and languages and celebrations and traditions have changed over the years, but we really can trace things back to this time. And I just think that's so fascinating because I haven't done much research on spiritualism, and I just love that we can trace it back just like we can with other things connected to Halloween. Okay, both the necromancer and the medium employ metaphysical or magical practices, casting spells for the former, in entering a trance state, or evoking spirit manifestations for the latter, to force the return of dead spirits in order to do the bidding of the caller. Although the necromancer may also be summoning divine entities, including gods or demons. If the modern version of the seance, with its Ouija boards and phone apps, doesn't look much like the 19th century spiritualist model, the basic methods and goals nonetheless remain the same: to facilitate communication with spirits of the dead. It's just like what I was saying, things change over time, but are essentially all born out of the same interest. And I don't know, I love that. I love that she wrote that. The Ouija board sprang out of talking boards, sometimes employed by spiritualist mediums. A 21st century paranormal investigation, with its use of K11 meters to measure electromagnetic fields and spirit boxes, represents the natural evolution of the seance's obsession with providing scientific proof of ghostly visits. I never thought about the K11 meters and spirit boxes as just being a spinoff of Ouija boards and like being a more scientific version of Ouija boards. I find that a fascinating connection. All right. When the ethereal going gets tough, the 21st century ghost hunters will still call in a medium. Is then a medium a necromancer or a magician? The use of the word medium to describe an individual who facilitates contact with the spirits had a similar evolution to a seance. For a while, as mesmerism and animal magnetism sat side by side in Britain and America with the new religion of spiritualism, seance and medium were applied interchangeably within both systems. Medium, in fact, wouldn't show up in a dictionary in regards to either of these beliefs until 1860, when Joseph Worcester's A Dictionary of the English Language gave, as the 8th definition of medium, one capable of being put under the influence of animal magnetism, one through whom the phenomenal of animal magnetism are manifested. Just as with seance, some of the earliest references to spiritualists use of medium are editorials that decry the gullibility of believers. An 1852 article from the New York Sun, and carried by other newspapers around the world, entitled Spirit Revelations, first refers to knockers and other impostors in the United States, and then goes on to opine, "It is a sad thing to see a human reason perverted. We can scarcely keep our temper as we glance over the pages of the blasphemous trash now almost daily issued from the press. We see these blasphemous pretend revelations of disembodied spirits issued in a superior typographical style, and we must infer that their circulation not only pays expenses but brings profits. The warning, therefore, which we give to all is, avoid these spirit medium revelations as you would the forger's money." In 1852, the New York Daily Times went so far as to aver that the word had suffered a retrograde movement. That the world had suffered a retrograde movement, and noted that mediums are as plenty as hystericky ladies. I guess hysterical ladies, but they said hystericky. And then if you don't know, the word hysterical is related to the women's reproductive system, like a hysterectomy. That's where the first part of the word comes from. So it's just being like, you are crazy because your women parts made you that way. Medium also represents the Catholic Church's troubled history with spiritualism and seances. The word does not appear in the King James translation of the Holy Bible, where not a word I ever say, where Deuteronomy 18:11 proscribes against using a consulter with familiar spirits or a wizard or a necromancer, while Leviticus 20:27 goes even further and states, "A man also or woman that hath a familiar spirit or that is a wizard shall surely be put to death. They should stone them with their stones, their blood shall be upon them." The word medium wasn't substituted into these passages until the New English Bible and New American Bible translations of 1970. Real quick too, when I've been researching about witches, the King James translation, which she doesn't have here, but happened in like the 1500s. And before that, they didn't use words like wizard or witch. And it's like very interesting the ways in which the King James translation creates essentially the religious fanaticism around witches and magic, which then in turn, and of course this line, shall surely be put to death, they shall stone them with stones, their blood shall be upon them. I mean, that's extremely damning. And that these are the references that Europeans and then later colonialists in America used to commit the crimes of killing women for witchcraft. So keep that little bit in your mind. We'll get into it more in the witch chapter. Forthcoming, I promise. The intent, however, is clear. Death is the punishment for those who seek to converse with the spirits. In the past, the church did indeed follow this instruction, as the history of the Inquisition, when tens and thousands of innocents were stripped of their property, tortured, hanged, or burned at the stake, ably demonstrates. Although it must be noted that the majority of these victims were tried, convicted, and sentenced in secular courts. Yes. But the church at the time, secular courts aren't thought of in the same way that like modern secular courts are. And the courts at that time weren't really like that far removed from religious teachings. It was a much bigger part of people's lives during the Inquisition. Again, we'll get into it. Fortunately, the modern day church has proven to be more tolerant, if not approving. So where does the church stand on spiritualism? How is it possible that a practice that once led to the brutal execution of so many became not just acceptable, but even transmogrified into a parlor entertainment? That's a cool word I have to look up later. Surely, this represents an extraordinary and significant change in Western thought, doesn't it? It does. I love that she asked and answered her own question. Very much a woman after my own heart. The seance, how it came into existence, how it was defined by a generation seeking comfort against materialistic philosophies, how it became both a religion and an entertainment, and how it came to coexist, nervously at least on the church side, alongside Christianity, is the story of a massive cultural shift. But in order to understand how that transformation came about, it's necessary to begin by examining where it all came from. And that's the introduction to Calling the Spirits, A History of Seance by Lisa Morton. And then it goes on to the first chapter, Summoning the Old Spirits.